Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and almost good evening to those of us down under. Given the multiple time zones and countries we're all watching from today, I thought best to cover all our bases. I'm Jen Barwick, and the Program Manager for Wine Communicators of Australia, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this webinar today. Before I introduce our presenters, I thought I'd take this very quick opportunity to share a few details about our webinar series. We started this webinar series in March last year as an effective and cost-effective way to get conference standard presentations out to our members and wine businesses, wherever you are based around the country and the world now. As a wine communications body, the webinars have become another way for us to expand our role as a communications conduit for the Australian wine industry, linking our members and the wider wine industry with information, new ideas and the chance to engage. This is the first time we have promoted our webinar on such a global scale, and so we have fingers and toes crossed the technology will hold up to our lofty ideals today. At the very end of this webinar, we have an exit survey, which I encourage you all to fill out. It's an opportunity to tell us what works for you and to help us make sure we're delivering the content in the webinars that are of use and interest to everyone. Today's webinar has been developed in partnership with our bronze partner, Wine and Spirit Education Trust, WSET, on the topic of wine language. Host Jude Mullins is International Development Director at WSET, and today she's joined by a cast of international wine experts. We have Yang Shi, Founder and Managing Director of Taste Spirit in China, Simon McMurtry, Global Chief Executive of Direct Wines Limited, and Fiona Young, Head of the Drinks Academy Woolworths Liquor Group, representing Australia. But just before Jude takes the helm, I have a little housekeeping. For those of you who are new-time webinar participants, hello and welcome. You're welcome to sit back, listen and learn. Or if you are feeling brave enough, you can participate in this webinar by either asking a question or making a comment, as I can see a few people are doing in our comment box there down on the left-hand corner of your screen. Just type and send a message as you would an email. It's visible to all webinar participants, and they will have the ability to respond or add further comment. Alternatively, click on this. Alternatively, you can use Twitter. The handle and hashtag is on the screen, or you can email me and my email is up there now, as I'll be attempting to check emails, Twitter, and throw in a few questions of my own today. Feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar, but we may have hold some of the questions to the end of each speaker's presentation. And we'll also probably keep some to the end for the Q&A section at the end. If we do run out of time and we don't answer your question, don't worry. We'll also follow up with a blog after this webinar. Our webinar host, Redback, are also waiting in the wings, and I think may have been responding to some of the technical issues that are coming through. Instructions to get in touch are in the comment box. But that's it. That's the housekeeping. It's quite an easy platform to use. And before we get started, though, I thought we'd learn a little about who we have listening to us today with a very quick poll. So we're going to ask you a question that reflects, when the poll pops up, there it is, what sector of the industry do you come from today? So we have on-trade, off-trade, production. If you guys can spend a couple of seconds filling that out, I'll stop and we'll see who we've got out there. But we have PR and marketing, I think, might be our most popular traders. That's a lot of our members, but it'll be great to see some education people and see who else is coming through. On trade, off trade. That's fabulous. Well, I will wrap that up right now. So it looks like, oh, great, tie for education and PR and marketing. But what I will do now, and the good news there is that the next our presenters today have managed to come armed with content and advice relevant to the role of communication in all these sectors. So without further ado, allow me to welcome today's host, Jude Mullins.
Hi, good morning. Well, I should probably say good afternoon, good evening to most of you, because I think more of you are here from Australia and closer to that part of the world. Thank you very much for joining us. I just wanted to start by letting you know a little bit about the initial vision for this webinar, which is actually Australian-born. From when I was at Savour Australia last year, I managed to take a couple of days with a friend of mine who isn't really a wine drinker, but she came up to a vineyard with me. We were tasting some wine, and she very seriously asked me the question, how do you come up with all these different terms to talk about wine? And that really got me thinking about whether we make things too complicated. I can clearly remember learning how to describe wine when I was writing shelf talkers for different Oddbins wine stores a few years ago now, and talking to wine-loving customers about the latest hot products. But I started to wonder whether I was sounding a bit like an astrophysicist to my customers, and had I actually turned into that pretentious wine geek that we try and avoid at social functions. So that really was what prompted the start of this discussion and the communications with wine communicators about hosting this webinar. Well, I hope that rings a few bells to some of you, and that what we look at today will actually address some of those issues and concerns we might have too. Before I really start on the subject, though, I just wanted to know how many people are familiar with WSET and to what level. So we've got another poll to come up for you, which will pop up on the screen now. And I'd be really grateful if you could have a look at those questions and give us your response. Great. So it looks like we have quite a few people who have done a WSET course. Some who are teachers and some who are hoping to do programs, but there are a few people out there who haven't heard of us at all, or have heard of us but aren't so sure about what we do. So we'll close the poll for now and move on to the slides, and I'll just tell you a little bit about the WSET before we move forward. Okay. So for those who aren't too familiar with us, the WSET was founded in 1969, originally to provide education and training for the UK drinks industry. And then in 1991, our programs were opened both to international students and to wine enthusiasts around the world. In 2001, we were in 18 different countries with 3 qualifications and 5 languages, with just over 10,500 students. And if you look at our 2014 figures, we're now in 62 countries with 9 qualifications, 18 different languages, and over 56,000 students. So there's been a massive growth in what we do and where we're available around the world, and also the linguistic scope. We are an independent educational charity. We have a board of trustees who oversee what we do, and we're run on a self-financing, not-for-profit basis. So thinking about how we fit in with the tasting and language of wine, one of the things the WSET has done with our qualifications is developed a systematic approach to tasting. And for us, this is a structured way of generating tasting notes and providing descriptions of wine. It's a tool to help people draw conclusions about wine, including about quality, readiness for drinking, and food and wine pairing. It gives us a basis to identify origin of wine, grape varieties, and also price points. But perhaps most importantly for us today, it provides us with a common language to communicate wine in any language around the world where the WSET programs are available. And for us, that's probably one of the most exciting things, that it doesn't matter what language you're speaking, you can actually communicate using common terms and describe and discuss wines effectively together. I'm not going to talk to you and take you through our systematic approach to tastings one by one, because that's what our courses are for. But let's have a look at how the language develops across our different qualification levels. Because everything the WSET does is building on what's gone before. So you can see here we've got our very simple level 1 introduction to tasting. It is very concise, probably what the majority of people want to know about wine if they're going into a wine bar or a wine shop. But also with the end use, how do I serve this wine? Maybe what do I eat or have with this wine in a social setting? When we move up to level 2, you can see we're starting to add a little bit more context to that. So when you're looking at colour, we're adding more detail. When we're looking at intensity on the nose, we start to add in more to the flavour and aroma characteristics. And we add a little bit more detail into how we would describe things like acidity and tannin, which are only just mentioned in that first level. And perhaps more importantly, we start to introduce our lexicon of tasting language. So we're encouraging students to build up a way of describing different wines with a common language. And that stays consistent as we move up through the different levels. When we move up to our level 3 qualification, we're taking that same basic tasting language we had at level 2 and then starting to use that. So where do those primary, secondary and tertiary aroma characteristics come in? How do they help us talk about development? And then we also broaden the scope about how we describe things. We know that a lot of wines fall into that medium category. So at level 3, we start giving more options for people to define what medium actually means, where those wines fall within that. So building up that language. And then finally, when we get to our diploma level, we're looking a lot more at the conclusions. We have this concept that at diploma, you could give a basic tasting note of appearance, nose and palate. If it's been well written and accurate, you could pass that to somebody else and they can actually come up with a very detailed conclusion about that wine to communicate to others. So for us, it's all about communication, how we develop that language and build through the different qualification levels. But the question would then be, would you use a diploma level tasting note when you're talking to your customers in a wine bar or a wine shop? Is that the level of detail that you would use when you're speaking to your customers? Is it more appropriate maybe to when you're communicating with your staff? So any questions, any thoughts on that, then please feel free to put those into the comment box and we'll pick up on those as we go through. But I think you've heard enough about me, enough about the WSET and where we fit in. But so I'm going to hand over to the first of our speakers to discuss this issue. So I'd like to welcome Young Shi, who's joining us from mainland China. So Young, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jude. Hello, everyone. It's been great pleasure to be invited by WSET to talk about this topic and share with you my past experience working as a wine taster, judge, educator, or sometimes sommelier. It's been really interesting topic. Just a quick introduction. My name is Yang Shi from Taste Spirit. Taste Spirit is a group of wine media and education in China. We 3 co-founders are specialized in branding and marketing apart from wine. We decided to set up Taste Spirit with our working experience in UK, France, and US, and different countries, just to act as a bridge to help global wine brands overcome cultural barrier and achieve successful strategic positioning and marketing in China. We've currently got 150,000 subscribers and 20,000 WeChat and 20,000 Weibo followers, just very briefly. Also, we provide WSET education as one of the APPs. To start with, I'd like to apologize for my PPT. So, because this is probably one of the most unprofessional looking PowerPoint I've ever made in my professional life. That is because I take this theme, the topic, too seriously, because I want to make it consistent with the theme of today to keep things simple, light, and fun. So I think in most of times we feel when we are in the wine world, we come across a lot of interesting or funny or complicated words. It's just like a Da Vinci Code. It's far beyond our understanding. So we'd like to discuss and see, are we overcomplicating wine language? If you look at wine history, you will notice that wine was created for enjoyment or maybe religion or health purposes. or maybe build up guts to share your secrets. But wine was never meant to be made to confuse people. I think some snobs made it really complicated. And as Alfred said, words like nature half reveal and half conceal the soul within. So this is why we see the problem at the moment. People become enophobia, which means they are afraid of talking about wine, drinking wine, looking at the sommeliers, smelling empty glasses before pouring the wine, like some mysterious tribal ceremony. It's just really weird, and they are afraid of making mistakes. But our mission is to convert these people from enophobia to enophile, which means they will become a connoisseur or serious wine lover. And it's really all about how you communicate to them about wine. And we want them to feel brave, to try out different wines, and to come back to explore more. This is our purpose. But what exactly happening in the real world is, if you look at the general public, they will look at it, oh, it's remarkably accessible wine, £2.99 bottle from Lidl. This is how you usually see people talk about wine. I asked my friends in UK, I said, how do you choose a wine for your daily consumption? And they will simply give me answers like, I go to Tesco or Sainsbury's, or see whatever is on offer, I grab it. As simple as that. They are very price sensitive. It doesn't really matter, to them how it tastes like, is a full body or medium body. They haven't come that far, but some maybe sophisticated customers, they will start talking about whether it's sour or bitter, mentioning some flavors. For general public, don't make them be afraid of wine, just, when you start using some complicated terms. And when you go to restaurants, what diners really care about? From time to time, you see sommeliers stand there as if a personal talk show, try to share, but actually showing off their knowledge. But do customers really care? Look at these cats. So long as it's fish in a bottle, that's fine. Job done. Why don't really care how the bottle is packed or what vintage? But you have to judge this separately. Some sophisticated customer will ask you why you're not giving the previous vintage and what's the difference between them, etc. You have to explain things in much more detail. For majority of the restaurant goers, they probably simply just say, give me red, give me white. And the maximum you can go is talking about maybe light red, easygoing, fruity, or spicy. That's the maximum you can go. The more you talk about your wines, I'm afraid you might not be able to sell it because you put them off. This is based on my limited experience working as a sommelier in Mayfair in London. I just want to gain some experience for my future research references. This is how I found out it's going to put people off. I think all they want is stories. You might talk to them about some interesting stories or some interesting things to spice this wine up, but not about the wine itself only. And for wine students, that's more interesting because just want to share with you, recently we did a survey. We asked all our WSET students and readers to send us, to share with us the most weird, unacceptable wine terms they've ever come across. The more weird, the better. And the winner will gain some tickets of Manuel Lescaut from Chile. So we got really good response. So what I've got, I don't mind sharing with you. So it will go like grandma's old cabinet in the afternoon sun, minerality, truffle, gooseberry, caspi, little white flowers. I think the minerality, well, sometimes it's not that difficult as the truffle and gooseberry because I taught in UK before, which is fairly easy to explain gooseberry. But for my Chinese students, it's a torture. There's no way I can bring gooseberry from UK to China, and nobody knew how it smells like. It really just forcing the students to memorize the Sauvignon Blanc smells this word, not fruit. I've never seen this fruit. And little flowers is also very vague because it can be apple flower or jasmine or orchid or plum blossom. It can be anything. So when you say this word, it doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless. It's not helping you explain or sell your wine, and it's just confuse people. And other weird words we've come across, like stable or crisp. Well, we know we talk about the acidity, but for customer, crisp. We're dog, linear, which linear is a word that even me, I struggle to understand. So a lot of weird words. So that prompted me to sit back and say, hang on, let me look at these things and rethink. Why do we need to use these words? Well, we need words to describe wine during our education. Well, two main purposes. One is to understand and evaluate wine, and the second one is to communicate. So you can talk to other people, you can share some views. But I think Jude started this presentation by introducing the framework from WSET. I think WSET did fantastic work. To start with, wine is not a simple thing. It's not like a beer or spirit. You know, it's not like a beer. It's a combination of science and art. You cannot easily teach people to appreciate wine. So you need a framework to start with. It's like I remember when 7-8 years ago when I started my first salsa lessons, I had to learn some rigid moves. But now I don't need that. I have my own movements. I have my own choreography. But it's all about, to start with, you need something easy to define, to repeat. This is really important work that has been done by WSET. I think that's revolutionary. It's like painting and dancing or writing. They all share the same principles. But for students, after they have learned the frame, they have to learn to work out of the frame. I think that is also very important, which is taking me to the next slide. So when you talk about wine, you need to consider your audience. You have to differentiate your audience. What's their knowledge level? What's their expectation? Which means what they expect to hear from you. What's their interest? Are they interested in investing? So you don't talk about the flavor, right? Are they interested in laying down some wines or sharing in particular occasion, but it has to be matched with some really precious cuisine? All these things, you need to listen. And when you talk to them, you have to differentiate inexpensive wine versus premium priced fine wine. I really noticed that when I stood in Waitrose and picked my own wine, I know real serious wine lovers will pick the bottle, turn it over, and read through all the detailed description. 1 hectare, terroir, single vineyard, 30% of French oak, new. All this information only will be read by the premium wine lovers, the sophisticated consumers, but not inexpensive wine buyers. So you have to be careful in choosing the words when you describe or educate. Also, the second one is about change language for different markets, regions or countries. Because when I taught in UK, I have to crack different jokes. I use different tasting notes like apple crumble. But in China, I never use apple crumble. Nobody bake it or eat it. I have to use durian or goji berry, which is very alien to Westerners. But for me, I think three simple principles. Firstly, to start with their familiar things. Make sure your term is not that complicated. It has to be able to be linked to their familiar things and to prompt artistic correspondence. And second thing is it has to be close to their life. It's not just some random word. For my second last slide today, this is very close to people's lives. They've all know these people on my pictures, right? And no matter how many times I told people not to hold the glass incorrectly, nobody listens. But when I've shown this picture, everybody memorized it. And so who did right? Kim Jong-un, not any other countries, right? Even Obama did it wrong. But they remember these things because it's close to their knowledge structure. And it's interesting, it's fun. People had a laugh, but they remember it. Instead of saying you have to grab the stem because you affect the temperature, which is boring. They don't want to memorize it. So ultimately, for me, I think I will always try to keep my descriptions precise and relevant. And please do remember, it's not a linguistic competition. And if you need any more information, please scan our WeChat code. And happy to be in contact anytime you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yang.
Oh, thank you.
We just had a question come through for you, Yang. Do the same principles apply in the UK as in China? Is it a concept of keep it simple all the way?
No, it's not. You have to judge the situation and the audience. When I talk to the geeks in China, or maybe they've been collectors for 10 years, you have to be really down to the details and use very delicate, very special words because you are describing some delicate differences. But for majority of the public, you should avoid it. You really have to judge the audience and make your own decision when you talk about same wine can be described in total different ways.
Great, thank you very much, Yang. We're just going to move over to our second speaker of this afternoon, Simon McMurtry, the Global Chief Executive from Direct Wine. So, Simon, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And the first thing I want to say is that I think what Yang is describing in the context of the Chinese market is actually our experience in America, the UK, Germany, India, around the world. So even in countries which have a long and reasonably sophisticated wine culture, our experience is that for the vast majority of customers, the vast majority of wine drinkers, they really appreciate very straightforward language. It's a very small percentage who enjoy complicated language about wine. So I slightly correcting what you just said, Yang, I actually think that if you're in the business of wine education or wine communication, you need to focus very hard on who your audience is. And probably your audience will really appreciate really uncomplicated language. My sort of point of reference is what my job is, and my job is looking after the direct wine business around the world. And you know, I put on the slide here, not to show off or brag, but just to sort of to illustrate the significance of this. You know, we're selling over 50 million bottles of wine across America, the UK, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, Poland, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and India to over 1 million customers every year. So we've got a lot of people drinking our wine. And our experience around communication, and we test out different communication strategies all the time, it is to have the result of us having more customers and to make sure that each of those customers buys more wine from us each year. It's as simple as that. We're measuring the success of our communication by how effective it is in more customers enjoying more wine more often. And critically, in the second bullet point on our goals slide is we just want people to feel more confident about trying new wines, and we want people to want to buy and taste the wine a second time. And some of the examples I discovered when I joined Direct Wines in 2007 are probably worth sharing. Many, many customers of ours in the UK tell us that they hate Chardonnay, but they love Chablis. And when you tell them that Chablis is made from the Chardonnay grape, they're absolutely astonished. And there's a different group of people who tell you that they hate Sauvignon Blanc, but they love Sancerre. And when you tell them Sancerre is made from the Sauvignon Blanc grape, they're again absolutely amazed. And I would say that there are probably under 10% of our customers around the world who would know that Puy Frisé is Chardonnay and Puy Fumé is Sauvignon Blanc. Because we work in a wine business and we're very enthusiastic ourselves, it's very easy to slip into the trap of thinking that we know what our customers might actually know. But when you actually talk to customers, check do research, do insight studies, which we do all the time, we discover that the level of knowledge is remarkably low. And actually, they are more interested in learning about the people to do with the wines than they are about the technical things to do with the wines. And I saw an article in the most recent issue of Harper's Magazine written by Guy Woodward. And Guy was the editor of Decanter Magazine, probably the most famous wine magazine in the world. And Decanter one associates with being really quite upscale for serious wine connoisseurs, enthusiast wine lovers. And I thought that for Guy to choose to write an article saying it's the people who we remember, not their wine, was absolutely fascinating. But it is our experience in direct wines around the world that if we communicate about who made the wine and which grapes they used and where it was made, we get a really great response from customers. And if we slip into complicated taste profiles, people are very quickly intimidated and they switch off. And we have an internal expression which we use in the company, which is we believe that most people's taste sense is in the heart and not the head. And if you remember one thing from my section of today's webinar, hold on to that quote. It's the taste is in the heart and not the head. One of the wines that I'm enjoying drinking at the moment is a wine called Garvi, which comes from the Piemonte region in the north of Italy. And when you give people Garvi to taste, typically my experience, they thoroughly enjoy it. But it takes some work to get them to understand, well, this is made from the Cortese grape, not a grape you come across very often. Piemonte is the north of Italy. It's near the beautiful Swiss-Italian lakes. Oh, I know where you're talking about now. This is the land of truffles, and people are fascinated about truffles and truffle pigs and all that story. And then you talk about the specific wine, the Garvi wine we sell, called Villa Broglia. And the estate was bought by a man called Bruno Broglia in 1972, who used to have a holiday house in that region of Italy, fell in love with the region, decided to buy a property, then went on to bring his son into the business. And by starting to talk about Bruno and Piero Broglia and their experience in the Garvi region and how they built up their winery and their estates and how they made this delicious wine, suddenly people have an image in their head of the Cortese grape and Garvi as a wine. And the next time they see it on a wine list, they think, oh, I'll give that a go. But without that background, they wouldn't dream of trying it, which would be a real shame. It's a delicious wine. On the next slide, I've deliberately said, as my heading, language is pictures and words, not just words. And even though the heading for the session that Jen and Jude chose is, do we overcomplicate our wine language? I think we should think about imagery as part of that. And I put some images on this slide, which is just, warm, tasty, sunny countryside, and your brain does say, I would like to be there having that experience myself. And I've put deliberately on the slide after that, these pictures won't help, with some pictures of some somewhat ugly men in rather unattractive poses or a sort of distant tractor in a semi-planted vineyard. That doesn't inspire you to want to try the wine. The previous pictures do make you think, I'd love to be there. So when we think about what language we want to use to communicate about wine, in my experience, it's as important to be thinking about what imagery do we want to be using, as well as what words we want to be using. When I teach people in our company about communication of wine, I always suggest to them they think about wine as a friend and in terms of how you form relationships with people. And instinctively, as human beings, when we're talking to somebody, we think, is he interesting, the person I'm talking to, or is he just boring? We also think very quickly, are we on the same wavelength, or is she much too clever for me? And if she is, human nature says, we won't want to carry on talking to her. Or is he making me want to discover much more about him, or do I wish that he would just go and talk to someone else? The experience when you're at a social gathering. And it's like that with wine. If the language being used is making you think, I don't want any more to do with this wine, we're failing. If the language being used is making you think, this sounds exciting, I'd like to try this, even before you've tasted it, then you're achieving, the goals you want to be achieving. One of the comments, again, we use internally is, wine communicators often make the mistake of communicating to themselves. If the person you were trying to communicate with hasn't understood what you said or isn't motivated to try the wine, you have failed. And we then sort of bring that into life in saying to the people who are wine writers around the world, who are you trying to talk to? When you're writing copy to sell a wine, you must have in mind who it is you're addressing. Talk to them as a friend. They will appreciate that. Don't talk to them as an expert. Don't use any technical language. And I like some of the examples that Young gave earlier, because it intimidates people. Don't try and break down taste into clever other tastes. And Young mentioned the gooseberry example. It's astonishing how frequently you read about wine being described in very obscure tastes, which most of us have never tasted or rarely tasted. And when we actually try the wine, we struggle to identify that taste, and then we just feel a fool. And in your communication, keep on coming back to the people, the drinker, the wine producer, you as their wine friend. And in our experience, and we're selling over 300 million pounds of wine a year, it will sell a lot more wine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. There's a couple of questions that have come through from the participants from the webinar. So Lillian has asked a question, is it also about more about what you say, but also how you say it?
I think it's a good question. And, what I'm trying to illustrate is if what you choose to say is complicated, even if you express that very well, you're still going to lose your audience. So the first focus has to be on choosing the right what to talk about, and then obviously choosing friendly language, just as when you're forming a friendship, so the person isn't intimidated.
Great, thank you. And another question that came through, is it about making a connection with a place or a person? Is one more important?
Well, when I was describing just now about the Brolia family at Villa Brolia in Garvey, using the Cortese grape in truffle country in Piemonte, I'm trying to paint a picture so that you can imagine being there. I've just come back for a week's holiday in Capri, and the three key white wine grapes in that part of Italy are Fiano, Greco di Tufo, and Falanghina. And because Australians are the most imaginative winemakers in the world, Australians are now using all three of those grape varieties. And I had a fantastic Australian Fiano recently. But having a sense of Capri, Campania, that part of Italy, the beautiful, beautiful southern Italian countryside, side by side with the people working on making those wines and serving those wines and inspiring us, all help to create a lovely holiday. So for me, the people and place come together to paint a picture, and a picture of a place that you want to be at and take part in. So they're both equally important, I think.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. So moving on to our final presenter of the afternoon, I'm going to pass you over to Viona Young from the Woolworths Liquor Group. Thanks, Viona.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Viona Young. I manage the Drinks Academy for the Woolworths Liquor Group. I'm going to talk today about how our wine language doesn't necessarily change based on whether we're talking to a student or a consumer. The language we use is determined by a number of other factors. So to give you a little bit of insight, the Drinks Academy was created to establish a central source of product and customer service education for our two bricks and mortar banners, that is Dan Murphy's and BWS. So prior to this, there was a rather ad hoc approach to product and customer service training across our businesses. The primary purpose of the Academy is to give our people the confidence and the competence to have great conversations with customers. We want them to be passionate storytellers, able to talk about product details, and more importantly, to be able to tell the stories behind the brands and even their own stories around the brands. Whilst we know this requires both confidence and competence, we know that confidence is far more important. Our people can have all the wine knowledge in the world, they can be absolute experts, but if they can't hold a great conversation with a customer, then we're in trouble. Just to give you a little bit of insight, to our business, there's around 185 Dan Murphy's stores, 1,225 BWS stores, so around about 1,400 in total. We have 12,500 in-store employees, and we serve around about 3 million customers a week. We have stores in the most remote locations through to stores in the middle of the city. So as you can imagine, training our team members in wine or in anything else is no easy feat. The language we use is absolutely critical to ensuring our people are engaged. And if our people are engaged, we've got a much better chance of engaging our customers. So that we know that for employees, and this is a bit of a generalisation, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb, the style of training and ultimately the wine language we use comes down to three main things: tenure, interest, and involvement. Tenure is obviously their length of service, so the training and the language becomes more complex the longer they are with the business. And if they're particularly interested in wine or other categories, they'll fly through the early stages of our self-paced learning. And lastly, if an employee's involvement is high, that is, they consume wine or other categories regularly, we also see them move through the self-paced learning really quickly, and they become more capable of using complex language when it's appropriate. For our customers, the language we use or the way our team members speak about wine comes down to two things: occasion and involvement. And I'll speak about those more soon. So I think this slide's fairly self-explanatory, but it's a nice way of looking at when more common language is appropriate and when it's time to be more complex in our language. Our most basic training modules use what can be described as common language, and our language gets more complex as the employee journeys through their training. By the time they get to WSET level 3, which not all employees do, but a number of them get there, their ability to speak about detailed complexity of wine is much, much greater. For our customers, it's also relatively simple. For those that have little involvement in the category, that is, they're a low consumer of wine, a more common language approach is more appropriate. For example, helping a low-involvement customer with wine for a barbecue is probably going to involve a broad discussion about a decent, good value barbecue wine that looks impressive enough, as opposed to specifically matching a wine with each food item that's being served, as you might with a higher involvement and a more regular consuming customer. The trick, though, is how does a team member know what sort of a customer is standing in front of them? Because despite the stereotypes, it's pretty tricky to tell just by looking at them unless they're a regular customer. The critical skill, and I say skill because it's not natural for most people, or probably skills, is to be able to ask open-ended questions and enough of them to ascertain both the customer's requirements and what sort of language to use when recommending a wine. So the other main skill is being able to listen intensely to the responses. So the questions might include what brings you in here today, what are your favourite wines, what are you drinking right now, etc., etc. Without the right questions, our team members can easily find themselves in a number of uncomfortable situations. So if they underestimate the customer's involvement level, they'll use more common language and offend the customer, who really probably wants their level of wine knowledge acknowledged. And if they overestimate the customer's involvement levels and therefore knowledge, they'll end up using complex language that baffles the customer and can leave them feeling not very smart and definitely not very satisfied. What we also know about our Dan Murphy's and our BWS customers is that those with low involvement and low consumption have a pretty distinct comfort zone. They'll more often than not stick with one varietal. And for those of us in the industry or those of us with regular consumption, this seems a little bizarre, but we know there's a large set of customers who literally drink Sauv Blanc or Cab Sauv or Chardonnay all year round, no matter the occasion. To get complex with our wine language or with our language with these customers adds no real value to them, and it adds no real value to us. What we can do sometimes is introduce them to different brands within that varietal or possibly slight variations within it. At the opposite end of the scale of those customers, like many of you listening, who have high involvement and are willing to try different styles, varietals and brands, these are the people we can have a more complex conversation with, obviously. For the customers in the middle, we still need to be fairly careful. Whilst the customer may be comfortable or even quite knowledgeable about a particular varietal or a style of wine, it doesn't mean that he or she is comfortable in a complex conversation about other varietals. So we know these customers are willing to try something new, but they don't want to stray too far. So if that customer is a Shiraz drinker, for example, recommending a Shiraz Viognier is probably enough of a stretch for them. Again, asking lots of questions and listening intently to the responses will help move this forward. To give you some insight into our product and specifically our wine education, we take a blended approach to learning with a philosophy of short, sharp and shiny video-based modules. We have a learning management system and a set of iPads that live out amongst the store. We keep all of our modules 2 to 4 minutes in length, and we start with very, very basic what is wine, and it journeys from there. We also partner with suppliers to help us create the training, and we have some key relationships with suppliers to work through that. We also have a team out across the country who go into stores to do one-to-one coaching and to ensure our team members are regularly tasting products, and with a large focus on wine. This team also spends time coaching our in-store team members on better conversations with customers or solution-based selling. We need to find out our customers' needs, and we now need to sell to that. If we don't know our customers' needs, then we can't sell them anything. Again, we're back to asking the right questions to ascertain those needs, desires, and ultimately the type of language we use. I also mentioned earlier that we encourage our team members to be storytellers, and I guess herein lies the poetic in our wine conversations. Being able to tell the story behind a brand, an anecdote about a winemaker, or a story about consuming that wine will help engage the customers with a particular wine and hopefully with that store again in the future. I talked a little bit about occasion and involvement in regards to customers, but we all know that making the right recommendations or using appropriate language to get to a wine that leaves the customer feeling satisfied is far more complex than that. So I want to talk a little bit about occasions and the social risk and the social currency that goes with occasion, as well as great storytelling, because this is really where it all comes together. We tend to talk about 4 main types of occasions. The first one is at home. So this is a glass of wine whilst cooking dinner at the end of the day, for example. The second is social. So this is wine with friends at a barbecue or a dinner party, for example. The third is celebration. So this is New Year's Eve or a party, something that requires champagne or another special drink. And lastly, we have gifting. So purchasing wine for the first type of occasion has very little social risk involved. So if you're consuming it at home without company, then it's not a risky purchase for you. For the other occasions, social events, celebrations, gifting, there's a higher element of social risk for the customer. And we have to help our team members use language and tell stories that help our consumers make choices they feel great about. This is also where, I guess, the involvement element can come undone. So if a consumer has low involvement with wine but is wandering around the premium section because they want a $200 gift, it's pretty easy to start to use the wrong language or have the wrong conversation. Again, we have to ask the right questions and listen intently to the response. So this is something I could continue to talk about, but in summary, our wine language shouldn't be determined by whether someone is a student or a consumer, or by what they're wearing or which part of the store they're wandering around in. It's determined by asking great questions, by having the ability to adjust our language, the ability to adjust our stories, to have different conversations with each and every customer or student, because every single one of them is actually going to be different. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Fiona. I have a question that's come through for you. Are there any writers, publications, or anything that you would encourage staff to use for knowledge building? And is it different to the general consumer information?
Probably not. I think that if we're trying to get our people to be storytellers, then they're going to read the same information or have the same information as our consumers do. They just need to be able to tell the story better and be capable of having a great conversation around it. We absolutely encourage our team members to get out there and do their own research, though, and not just rely on the information that we can give them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to all of the presenters so far. Just then to bring us back to some of the original questions and premises for this webinar, how do we communicate about wine with our colleagues, staff and customers, and are all their needs the same? Is there a time and a place for the poetic in sales? Is it what the customer wants? Is it relevant to all markets? Should our language change for different markets, or is a one-size-fits-all approach best? Do we make assumptions about the knowledge level of our colleagues, staff and customers? And do we use the same language to sell an inexpensive wine to premium priced fine wines? So there's a few questions there, and we'd be very grateful if those who are participating in the webinar today could send us in their questions to put to the panel so that we can have a little bit more of a general discussion. And I do have one question to start us off. Grover's asked, how do you adapt conversational language and person-to-person wine service to online descriptions? So one for the panel.
Oh, Simon here. Can I start with that one? I mean, I think we're really lucky. In the world we now inhabit of Weibo, WeChat, Facebook, Twitter, text messages, we're all very confident in using a smaller number of words to communicate our enthusiasm for something in life. And exactly the same applies to wine. So we just have to be a bit more disciplined about not using too many words to share our enthusiasm about the person who made it or where it came from, or whatever. But the principles apply, the same principles apply, and people, because of how social media is used, are remarkably accepting about people being quite informal in their language in that way. And that informality is really welcomed by people.
Great, thank you, Simon. Anybody else wanting to comment on that question? Great. Well, we'll move on to the next question I have coming through, which is, as a journalist, the better we know a subject, the easier it is to simplify a subject. Does this premise apply for wine as well?
I'll start again, but I think the others should chip in. Absolutely. If you take the time to read, Hugh Johnson, Jancis Robinson, World Atlas of Wine, and to really understand the world of wine, you will do a much better job of communicating about wine to your employees and to your customers. So the research and the background study makes it, and absolutely including WSET training, makes a massive difference to your ability to be able to choose the right words to communicate well about wine so that people feel as enthusiastic as you do about the product.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I've heard some great storytellers who have sold some pretty amazing products and lots of them without having a lot of knowledge. They just have a great ability to connect with a customer. So whilst the language and the knowledge definitely helps and will help in certain circumstances, I think there's times where our ability to provide just great customer service or have a great conversation is actually more important.
Can I just quickly chip in? I like this question very much. I think it's so much easier to complicate things than simplify things. I've never worked in wine shop, but many of my friends do. When a customer approach you or approach the shelves, you actually only have a few seconds to grab the attention and describe a wine. If you lose that opportunity, you finished. You can't get her back. She will probably just roam to other different shops or different wines, not the wine you want to promote. So you really have to be, I think firstly, you have to read their minds. You understand their needs in less than 1 second. And then you describe that, put it in simple words in another 2 seconds. I think that's how you need to do efficiently. That's a very efficient way of communication.
But I think we still need to be careful not to assume what the customer wants.
No, it's about the interaction you've been discussing. It's really about interactive understanding each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jude, this is Simon. There are a number of questions coming in. For example, does a standard wagon wheel of taste descriptors exist, or are detailed wine descriptors on back labels, very important? And all of our experience is that even if technical information does exist or taste profiles do exist, they're really not very helpful to get most people to enjoy tasting and buying wine.
Absolutely.
If the back labels tell a story, they're much better than trying to give you anything about minerality, acidity, crisp, or any of those type of words. And I've seen a variety of different attempts to break down wine taste into the wagon wheel type approach. None of them really work for helping more people to enjoy more wine. They're an interesting scientific exercise. They tell you something, but it's not a massive help, I'm afraid.
Yeah, totally agree.
Part of the joy of wine is it can't be neatly categorized. That's part of the pleasure of it.
And if we have a quirky story about a wine or a brand or about a winemaker, it's probably more likely to sell that wine or sell that brand than some of the taste descriptors that go with it.
Yeah, so one of the questions that has come through is, in a retail or restaurant environment, what are the key descriptors sought? Is it about body, acidity, tannin, or flavours? What are your thoughts there?
None of them. I mean, people want to know, will this wine be delicious with fish? Will this wine be great with beef, whatever?
Will this wine impress my friends?
The minute you start talking about tannin, you've lost 95% of the audience, maybe more.
This is
where we get into the danger of wine communicators talking to themselves. The words like minerality and tannin are grossly intimidating to the vast majority of wine enthusiasts and consumers all over the world.
Except for probably that top 5% of consumers who do have a high involvement and a high knowledge about wine.
Mm-hmm. I think when you describe that, I think Simon, completely agree with you. I think when you talk about acidity and tannin, you probably need to change the way you describe it. Usually in restaurants, you translate a low tannin or low acidity into easygoing wine, very fruity, very nice. This is a general plain language that and people can accept, can understand.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think if I just did a quick summary then. So there is a time and a place for complex language, potentially linked to selling those fine wines to the top 5% of your customers. But generally, the consensus is that we should be keeping it simple and using language to communicate effectively, but in meeting our customers and actually getting to know them and understand what their needs are as we work to communicate with them. So I just need to say then a big thank you to our presenters, to Young dialing in from Shanghai, Simon from just outside London, and Viona from Sydney. It's been great to have you on the panel, and we've really appreciated your insights into this subject, keeping it simple. Do we overcomplicate our wine language? So thank you very much. And over to Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.